The CEO of Rolex sat in silence, holding a letter that could end everything he had built. War had broken out. His company was being taxed into extinction, and the world had turned against him because of his name, his passport, and where he was born. But instead of surrendering, he did something no luxury brand had ever done. He vanished, changed countries, changed laws, and rewrote the rules of business forever. This is the story of how Rolex survived sabotage, scandal, and war, and became a billion-dollar empire that doesn't pay a single cent in corporate tax. What happened next would change the luxury industry forever. Before Rolex became a billion-dollar empire, it was just a dream, carried by a 12-year-old orphan. Hans Wilsdorf was born in Germany in 1881. By the age of 12, both of his parents were dead. He was sent to a strict boarding school, and that's where his obsession began. Not with watches, but with time itself. You see, every night, Hans would lie awake and listen to the ticking of the massive school clock. It was the only sound that made sense in his life. At 17, he packed his bags and left Germany to work with time. Not metaphorically, literally. He landed a job in Switzerland, the heart of the watchmaking world. And soon after, he got an offer to work at a watch export firm in London. He said yes, but that decision almost destroyed him. On his way to London, a thief stole everything: his luggage, money, even his inheritance. He stepped off the train in England with empty hands and a name nobody could pronounce. In early 1900s London, the world was still obsessed with pocket watches. Wristwatches were considered fragile, feminine, and laughably impractical for men. He believed that one day every man would wear a wristwatch. Soldiers, athletes, explorers. They didn't need elegance. They needed precision. So in 1905, at just 24 years old, Hans founded a company with his brother-in-law. They didn't even make watches. They assembled parts, checked quality, and exported them under a new name, Wilsdorf and Davis. But Hans had a bigger plan. He wanted to build the most accurate, elegant wristwatch the world had ever seen. And he wanted it to have a name that sounded powerful, global, easy to remember. So one day, while cycling through London, the name came to him, Rolex. He said it felt like winding a watch, clean, short, like a crown. Wristwatches were mocked. But Hans wasn't after popularity. He was after certification. In 1910, Rolex became the first wristwatch in the world to receive a Swiss chronometer certificate. 4 years later, in 1914, the British government awarded Rolex a Class A certificate, a distinction normally reserved for marine chronometers. The timing couldn't have been better, or worse, because that same year, World War I broke out. And suddenly, Hans's biggest advantage, being German, became his biggest threat. Anti-German sentiment exploded. Exports collapsed. The British government introduced a 33% tax on luxury goods being exported. So, Hans made the most painful decision of his career. He left England. He moved Rolex's headquarters to Geneva, Switzerland. He changed the name of the company and quietly erased his own nationality from Rolex branding. But even that wasn't enough, because just when the company was beginning to recover, his entire world shattered again. In 1944, in the final year of World War II, his beloved wife Florence died. The same year, he launched the Rolex Datejust. He had lost everything twice. His parents, his inheritance, his wife, even his home country. But out of that darkness came the most radical business decision Rolex would ever make. And it's the reason the company doesn't pay corporate tax to this day. The Second World War hit like a hammer. Hans had already moved Rolex to Geneva to escape the British tax system. But now, supply chains were collapsing, factories were closing, and Rolex's largest markets, Britain and the US, had stopped importing luxury watches. Worse, as a Swiss company in a neutral country, Rolex couldn't rely on patriotism or military contracts like other brands. Revenue plummeted. The business was bleeding cash. In 1945, just 1 year after his wife's death, he made the most unorthodox decision in luxury business history. He gave away Rolex, not to a corporation, not to shareholders, but to a private trust, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. The foundation structure meant Rolex never had to go public. It avoided shareholder pressure. And in a genius legal twist, Rolex became a charity, meaning the company would be exempt from Swiss corporate tax laws. Wilsdorf ensured that every franc of profit could be reinvested directly back into Rolex. Rolex didn't just survive, it adapted. During the 1950s and 60s, while competitors were ramping up production, Rolex restricted it. It didn't try to outsell Omega or Seiko. It outweighted them. Rather than flood the market, Rolex focused on chronometric precision explorer-themed branding, Mount Everest, deep-sea expeditions, extremely slow production cycles. It was the psychological strategy. By the 1970s, Rolex watches were status symbols. While other watchmakers went digital in the quartz revolution, Rolex doubled down on mechanical, repositioning itself as timeless. Rolex's financials are a black box. As a foundation, it has no legal obligation to disclose profit, salaries, or holdings. Some critics have accused Rolex of artificial scarcity, intentionally limiting production to inflate resale prices, market manipulation, fueling long wait lists to enhance brand desirability, ethical gray zones, operating as a tax-free nonprofit while selling luxury watches starting at $10,000. Yet despite the criticism, no court case has ever taken them down. The world was healing from war, and Rolex was now everywhere, from Mount Everest to the deepest point in the ocean. They had precision, they had protection, but they still didn't have the world's attention. So Rolex did something no one saw coming. A marketing stunt so bold, it would turn a Swiss timepiece into a global icon. In 1927, long before Rolex became a luxury titan, Hans Wilsdorf had a problem. No one believed a wristwatch could be waterproof. So he convinced Mercedes Gleitze, a young British swimmer, to wear a Rolex Oyster as she attempted to swim across the English Channel, a brutal 10-hour marathon through icy currents. And here's the twist. She didn't make it. But the Rolex on her wrist? It did. It emerged from the water, still ticking perfectly. The next day, Wilsdorf didn't hide the failed swim. He ran a full-page ad on the front page of the Daily Mail, boasting, "The Rolex Oyster, the watch that defies the elements." It worked. In 1931, Rolex invented the Oyster Perpetual, the first self-winding wristwatch with a perpetual rotor, a revolutionary mechanism that turned every movement of your wrist into power. The world didn't realize it at the time, but this was a turning point in mechanical watchmaking. Years later, Rolex did a stunt again, this time not with water, but air. In 1933, Rolex watches were used by pilots in the first ever flight over Mount Everest, proving they could function at extreme altitudes. By the late 1940s, Rolex had certified over 50,000 chronometers. 1 year later, that number doubled to 100,000. In 1960, Rolex took things even deeper, literally. The company strapped a prototype watch, the Rolex Deep Sea Special, to the exterior of the Trieste, a submarine descending into the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point on Earth. That's 11,000 meters deep. Under pressure so intense it could crush a car like a soda can. The watch survived. So Rolex made sure every newspaper in Europe and America knew. In the 1970s, Japanese brands like Seiko unleashed a new monster into the market: the quartz watch. Cheaper, more accurate, battery-powered. Swiss brands panicked. Many went bankrupt. Rolex stayed calm. While others scrambled to release quartz models, Rolex quietly launched the Oyster Quartz, produced in low numbers, and then backed off. Instead, Rolex doubled down on mechanical, on heritage, on legacy. It worked. In a world that worshipped precision, Rolex convinced people to worship the machine instead. While Omega and Longines flooded the market with cheaper watches, Rolex made fewer models, priced them higher, and tied every release to adventure, danger, and elite performance. The result? Rolex became the first brand to have a chronometer-certified automatic wristwatch. The Datejust 1945 became the world's first watch to automatically change the date. The Day-Date 1956 added a second window for the day of the week in 26 languages. And by the 1980s, Rolex was synonymous with excellence. Executives, celebrities, presidents, deep-sea divers, fighter pilots. If your wrist said Rolex, your reputation did the talking. As a foundation, Rolex doesn't publish annual reports. It doesn't disclose profits. It doesn't answer to shareholders. And it doesn't have to say where its money goes. Industry insiders estimate Rolex earns over $8 billion a year and reinvests a huge portion into itself. New factories, in-house research, and price controls. And yet, it pays zero corporate tax. Critics call it capitalist perfection with non-profit paperwork. Rolex calls it a legacy. In the modern era, Rolex watches are famously hard to get. Walk into any authorized dealer, and you'll likely hear, "We don't have that model right now. Join the wait list." Some people wait 2 years for a Submariner, 5 years for a Daytona. This artificial scarcity has triggered outrage online and in luxury watch forums. Rolex denies any manipulation, but when you limit production, don't disclose inventory and refuse to sell online. Suspicion is inevitable. What sets Rolex apart is the power structure. Most watch brands are owned by giant conglomerates like Swatch or LVMH, pushed by shareholders to increase profits. Transparent about supply, pricing, and expansion. Rolex is none of those things. It has no owners, no stock market pressure, no quarterly earnings calls, which means it can move in silence. While brands like Audemars Piguet and Omega chase trends, Rolex stays frozen in time, releasing subtle upgrades every few years, never changing too much, never speaking too loudly. The most powerful companies in the world aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, the most dangerous player in the room is the one you know the least about. That's Rolex. You won't find them fighting for market share at tech expos. You won't see them trending on TikTok. They don't chase the future. They build something that feels immune to it. But in a world driven by transparency, disruption, and digital dominance, how long can Rolex hide behind the curtain? Are they too big to fail, or just one scandal away from collapse? In a tech-obsessed world chasing smartwatches, wireless charging, and real-time notifications, Rolex stayed silent. While Apple sold 50 million smartwatches a year, Rolex refused to even sell watches online. The industry thought they were stubborn, arrogant, outdated. And yet, sales kept rising. In 2021 alone, Rolex sold over 1 million watches, generating more revenue than every other Swiss watch brand combined. They didn't adapt to the market. They made the market adapt to them. History is filled with giants who thought they were too big to fall. Blockbuster, Kodak, Nokia. All of them thought legacy was protection. All of them were wrong. Rolex has lasted a century, but the question now isn't whether they can survive. A symbol of precision, power, and permanence. From presidents to pop stars, deep-sea divers to astronauts, Rolex became the wrist of legends. Whether you're running a business, launching a brand, or starting from scratch, Rolex teaches one thing above all: perception is everything. They didn't build the best watch, they built the most desirable one. So, after 100 years, billions in revenue, and complete dominance, let's ask the one question Rolex never answers. Is Rolex a luxury masterpiece or the most elegant business illusion ever sold? You decide. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video with friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible business stories.